Hi students, this is part 2 of chapter 4, picking up the chapter on digestion and absorption and starting right now with the small intestine. This is definitely the most significant organ when it comes to the processes of digestion and absorption. Most, by far, occurs in the small intestine. The name of the sphincter that is between the stomach and the small intestine is the pyloric sphincter. The substance leaving your stomach, which has partially digested protein and a lot of acid from the stomach, is called chyme. And the chyme is gradually squirted into the small intestine by the pyloric sphincter. If the small intestine is having a hard time keeping up with the work that it needs to do, it will release a hormone called gastric inhibitory peptide. Sometimes we just abbreviate it GIP. GIP, like all hormones, travels through the bloodstream and delivers a message. And the message goes to the pyloric sphincter and the stomach, and it says, slow down, because I'm having a hard time, or the small intestine is having a hard time keeping up with the work. We'll do it eventually, but you're sending me probably a lot of fat, and I just need you to send it much more slowly. So remember that the small intestine is 10 to 11 feet long in a living, healthy person on average. It's divided into 3 sections: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. I still remember them as dogs just itch. You will occasionally pick up a book that will give you incredibly different numbers as far as the lengths of these sections of the small intestine. And in nutrition books, we generally say 10 to 12 inches for the duodenum, maybe 4 feet for the jejunum, and 5 feet for the ileum. But what happens is this is an incredibly muscular organ. And when we're living and healthy, it's tight and those muscles are fairly contracted. When it is diseased, or when we're taking it out of a dead body, those muscles really relax. And so suddenly you will read that it is 20 feet long, or you'll hear that someone's great aunt had 15 feet removed, and you'll wonder what was going on. That's because the muscles have relaxed and it's a lot longer. When we talk about 1, 4, and 5 feet, we're talking about healthy and some pretty tightly contracted muscles. The small intestine has circular folds. It doesn't really have the stretching abilities of the stomach. It's not meant to hold food in an area for several hours like the stomach is, but it does have some circular folds that will give it some flexibility. It also does not have the thick protective mucus layer, so we're going to see that it almost immediately has to neutralize the acid that will come from the stomach. It does, however, have some cells that produce mucus. It has endocrine cells that produce hormones, and within the structure of the small intestine, the lining, we see many cells that produce enzymes and will help in the absorption of nutrients. The microvilli and the brush border. Let me just go ahead to this picture. This is a cross section of the small intestine, and you might think it really looks like just a tube, but the tube is lined with finger-like projections called villi. The villi are tiny, but you can see them with your naked eye. They're not a microscopic structure. Each one of the villi then is lined with absorptive cells. And these absorptive cells additionally will have brush borders. So what this does is it gives an incredible amount of surface area so that the chyme that is passing through the lumen or the opening of this small intestine will have all kinds of areas where it can come in contact with the villi and have an opportunity to be absorbed. The accessory organs that provide substances to the small intestine include the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. The liver produces bile. Now, bile is especially important to the digestion and breakdown and subsequent absorption of lipids or fat. We'll talk a little later about enterohepatic circulation. The gallbladder isn't strictly necessary. It really is an empty sac, and it stores liver from the bile. And until it receives a hormonal message that the bile is needed, bile will kind of be stored in the gallbladder. The pancreas produces a bicarbonate, which is the substance that will neutralize the hydrochloric acid from the stomach. Other ingredients in the juices of the pancreas are the enzyme lipases. Remember, ASE is an enzyme. So a lipase is an enzyme that breaks down lipids. A protease is a protein breaking down enzyme. And then pancreatic amylase is an enzyme that breaks down the starch amylose. You might remember that the salivary glands also made amylase, but we termed those salivary amylase. The pancreatic juices are released into the duodenum through the pancreatic duct. So here again we see a diagram. The liver is the producer of bile. It really constantly produces it, but because we don't need it constantly, and we're not constantly having the stomach empty into the small intestine, the bile can be stored in the gallbladder. Then when you and I start to squirt our high-fat meal into the small intestine, the gallbladder will get the message. The hormone that is released, that triggers that, is secretin. No, I'm sorry, it's cholecystokinin, often abbreviated CCK. And the gallbladder gets the message from CCK, it contracts, and it will kind of give a big dose of bile. And this will go down here through the common bile duct and enter out a tiny sphincter called the sphincter of Oddi into the duodenum. Okay, this is actually a great summary slide of the hormones that regulate digestion and appetite. Spend a little bit of time with these. They come back, and they're things we want to be familiar with, and particularly as dietitians start to deal with diseased digestive systems, I need to remove a piece of the small intestine, and now suddenly I don't make cholecystokinin anymore. And what will the impact of that be, and how will I adjust diet and medications to deal without the production of this hormone? So spend, if you would, just a little bit of time, kind of maybe make some flashcards, but become familiar with these hormones of the digestive tract. Now, absorption is the actual passage through the wall of the small intestine, and at this point, the substance, the nutrient, will either enter directly into our bloodstream or in some cases into our lymph vessels. There are several biological processes that we use for absorption. Some nutrients are absorbed passively simply because there is a higher concentration on one side and they want to move to the area of lower concentration so that there will be equilibrium. Sometimes there is a protein carrier, a structure, and I need to move this substance, and one that has this, for example, is fructose. The fructose is in higher concentration on the inside of my small intestine after I have eaten a piece of fruit, for example. And so there's a special structure, a carrier, that will actually move that fructose from the area of higher concentration to lower concentration. Sometimes the process of absorption is more active, and this includes the fact that in this case, we actually have to burn some calories or create some ATP, and we sort of have to pump a nutrient from inside the gut to the inside of the body. And that would then be called an active absorption. And there's a carrier protein that does this, plus your body has to use some energy and has to use some ATP in order for this to process. Now, there's also a process called endocytosis or engulfment, and this is most common probably in newborn infants where the digestive tract is still rather primitive, and in fact the small intestine will literally reach out like a hand and engulf substances whole and incorporate them into the structure of the villi and get them passed through to the inside of the body. That's one of the reasons that, for example, the immune factors that are present in human breast milk, normally you would see those digested, but because of the nature of the newborn tract, it can engulf those substances and carry them through without digesting them. We don't tend to see this a great deal once we get past the first couple of months of life, but it's pretty significant, and again allows us to really utilize those immune proteins that are found really so wonderfully in human breast milk. Okay, this is a very nice diagram in terms of where are the primary nutrients absorbed. And we see that the stomach isn't really known as a site of absorption. A couple examples, a small amount of water will actually be able to leave your stomach and get directly into your bloodstream. But alcohol, 20% of alcohol never has to leave your stomach and can make its way directly into your bloodstream. As you can see, the small intestine is the site of most nutrient absorption. The glucose, amino acids, fats, a lot of the vitamins and minerals, 70 to 90% of water. The remaining 80% of alcohol is absorbed in the small intestine. And then the bile salts. Okay, so you're going, I thought the bile came from the liver to help with digestion, and it does, but it's here and it's helping us to digest and break down fat in particular, but it's still here. And so what actually happens is that it is reabsorbed and it enters the bloodstream and it is actually carried back to the liver. And your liver says, oh, good, I don't have to make any more bile. Here comes some of it back. And this kind of recycling of bile is referred to as enterohepatic circulation. What remains to enter into the large intestine does still have a fair amount of water. The longer it stays in the large intestine, the more water is absorbed to the inside of the body. And we will see some sodium, potassium, a few fatty acids. It's not significant calorie-wise, and a lot of gases are actually absorbed from the large intestine towards the inside of the body. Okay, this is just a diagram. This would represent facilitated transport. This would represent an active transport where you see that energy is being used, and this represents the engulfing of substances more or less intact. Okay, once these nutrients have been absorbed, how do I get them to the parts of the body that need them? And in fact, I'll rely on the two circulatory systems that exist in the body. So the bloodstream, the cardiovascular system, including the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. Water-soluble nutrients go directly through the small intestine and enter into the capillaries. In most cases, they're carried directly to the portal vein. Okay, lipids have to go into the lymphatic system, and from the lymphatic system, they are carried to a very large blood vessel near the heart, the vena cava, and at that point, they join in the bloodstream and will be transported to wherever the body is going to use them or store them. Now, let's go back to the colon or the large intestine. The first section, the section that joins the small intestine, is called the cecum. From there, we have ascending, transverse, descending, and finally sigmoid colon. We have the rectum, and finally the anus. The functions of the large intestine are absorption of water and some sodium and potassium and electrolytes, the removal of the fecal material, what remains. One of the most interesting functions of the large intestine is that this is a place that is supposed to be filled with healthy, helpful bacteria. We're actually not going to be in very good health or very good condition if I had a completely sterile large intestine. I want to build it full of healthful bacteria. So this is one of, I think, the most fascinating areas of future research. How do I create the most healthful blend of bacteria in my gut? And by the way, every time I have to take antibiotics, I change this composition of the bacteria in my gut. In fact, I kill everything good when I take antibiotics. So is there a way I could replace this bacteria with more healthful bacteria, or coax them into becoming a more healthful mix of bacteria? So the real truth of this is that we don't know enough about this to make many substantially useful recommendations. What we generally know is that what we have considered to be a healthful diet will probably maintain a good mixture of bacterial, intestinal, bacterial, and sometimes called the flora. People who practice vegetarianism have much, much healthier blends of bacteria than meat eaters do. So you can consider that. There is a company, they happen to have offices based in Milwaukee, that will do an analysis of your, no, they won't do it, I'm sorry, forget about that. But there are companies that will let you send in a fecal sample, and they will tell you about the genetic makeup of your bacteria, of the bacteria in your gut. Don't do that, don't fall for that, because First of all, it changes all the time. It'll be entirely different by the time you get the results back. And they're not going to be able to give you terribly helpful advice at this point on how you could alter it. There's no doubt that this has a very significant impact on what is digested, protection from disease, and look for more information on the health of the bacterial flora as you start to practice, and probably in the next couple of decades of practice, we'll start to get some much more useful and specific information on altering and improving this. Okay, so here, nice little diagram, cecum, ascending colon, transverse colon, descending, kind of an S-shaped curve here called the sigmoid colon, rectum, anal canal, and anus. Remember that there are two sphincter valves in the anal canal. First one is involuntary, second one is voluntary muscular control. And then we also had a sphincter between small and large intestine called the ileocecal valve. Okay, so I have been talking about the bacterial flora and my interest in them. We have known for a long time that the healthful bacteria actually are our best defense against disease-causing bacteria. The term pathogenic, if you're not familiar with it, pathology is the study of disease. So patho says disease, and genic is the origin. So a bacteria that would cause a disease. These bacteria also actually manufacture vitamins B12, with B12 in that blank, and biotin. They also are very helpful for the digestion of lactose and some fermentation. Now, there's a lot of talk about using foods, using supplements that are either pro or prebiotics. If you are purchasing a probiotic, you are purchasing a substance that contains the living culture. You know, even yogurts that have acidophilus cultures, kombucha, kimchi, many fermented kinds of foods that we eat contain living cultures, and there do appear to be some health benefits and some benefit to the overall health of the bacterial flora. The prebiotic is the consumption of non-digestible carbohydrates that actually help to promote the growth of bacteria. And again, generally, inulin, fructose, and resistant starches are prebiotic and again help promote bacterial growth. The state of evidence, there's a lot of research being put out on probiotics and prebiotics. It will be interesting to see how, again, in the end, the evidence shakes out. If I am traveling to a country where there is not healthful water available, where food preparation is not what I'm accustomed to, and I want to protect my digestive system, you'll often hear the suggestion, well, we can't guarantee you it will help, but maybe you would want to take a probiotic before you go. I'm not so sure the evidence supports it, but if it makes you feel better, go ahead and look for one. So just a couple of content review questions. What prevents food from entering the trachea? Can you answer that one? What's the purpose of the gallbladder? Can you do without it? Name 4 substances that are released by the pancreas into the small intestine. And what is the difference between a prebiotic and a probiotic? So this is the end of the second portion of chapter 4. I'm going to stop and do the uploading, and I will be back with the end of the chapter.